Greetings from the far side of the galaxy. I'm Fury, your host the most, here to bring you a story about titties. The virtual summer memory event has finally been translated after 3 years? So, because I couldn't get to it last week thanks to a certain inflatable toy, hint hint, click the link, we're getting to it this week. Starting things off is the literal most popular character in the game, Shenong. Beginning with his inspirations, he's based on a major Chinese god who is, surprise surprise, also named Shenong. The successor to the previous dynasty of Fu Shi and Nu Hua, Shenong is responsible for many of the things used today. His primary contributions were medicinal and agricultural, to the point that his name, Shenong, means divine farmer. He's credited with creating the plow, the axe, wells, irrigation, tea, and discovering over 300 different kinds of medicinal herbs, of which he usually did by just tasting them himself, which led to his untimely death. I did an entire video about Shenong, so if you want to know more, clicky clicky, linky linky. The way the myth was turned into Housamo Shenong is pretty clear. Both the myth and the transient specialize in medicinal herbs alongside testing it on themselves. However, the transient was more proactive with his medicinal efforts, going beyond herbal treatments and into trauma treatment. The thing about him succeeding Fu Shi and Nu Hua is referenced to his second artifact seen in his 4-star. It's that red thing behind him. It has the same power as one of the protagonist's rules of rending, able to rend the heavens to predict where war will happen. That's due to Shenong having inherited the actual artifact from Pinglai's exile Nu Hua, earning him Hakumen's ire. Notably, his research file for this event clarifies that as a physician, he's jealous of those who can treat mental issues, explaining why he's listed as disliking everyone's favorite robotherapist. The rest of his new unit's research file is basically a vague complaint on Shenong's behalf about students falling in love with him during summer. The style of dance his limited unit from the virtual summer memory event is doing is called Jiangwu, traditional Chinese sword dancing. His unit is 5 stars, wood attribute, long/type, and called the Summer of No. His first skill, Toxic Presence, applies stackable fatal poison to hit units at 90%, applies regular poison to hit units at 100%, and gives him advantage against fatal poison. The second skill is Impetus Sunshine. When he's hit, he applies arousal to himself at 80% and acceleration to himself at 40%. Okay, so Shenong's a bottom, good to know. The third skill, Enthralling Dance, applies Charm at 30% and Dazzle at 70% in a 2-square diamond radius after hitting. The final skill is Medicine Bomb, and boy howdy is it a long one. At phase start, he applies Remove Debuff and Poison to himself and allies in a 2-square diamond radius at 90 and 100% respectively. At turn start, he applies Poison Reversal to himself and allies in 1 square at 90% and gives up to 400 HP to himself and allies in 1 square after hitting at 80%. Honestly, Shenong's unit is freakishly good. He's a lot like Hot Springs Horkyu, who's one of the best units in the game, because like the basic wolf daddy, Shenong does everything he needs to do on his own. He spreads a stackable debuff he gets an advantage too, good support skills like Remove Debuff, and a health gain to give him lasting power. Don't tell Horkyu this, but I think Shenong's buffs are actually better than Horkyu's since his is not only self-directed, but he also supports a team. The one drawback that keeps him below Hot Springs Horkyu is that weapon type. Long Slash ain't half as good as magic, and it really limits how far he can spread his debuffs. That being said, he's still the ultimate goal, the must-have unit to pull on this banner. The next unit we're covering is the ever-popular and ever-suicidal Ombre Tigre. Ombre Tigre has 2 sources of inspiration. The first is the Ombre Tigre, which is sort of like the South and Central American version of the archetypical werewolf. It's an old Argentinian legend that states the ability derives from selling your soul to the devil. His secondary and much more interesting source is through the Aztec deity of Tepeyalat. The name Tepeyalat roughly translates into mountain and heart, and despite Ombre Tigre's name being Tiger Man, Tepeyalat wasn't a tiger, he was a jaguar. Identity theft isn't a joke, Ombre Tigre, or should I say, Ombre Jaguar. Back to Tepeolat, he wasn't just a servant of Tezcatlipoca, but also an alter ego, literally being warned by the smoking mirror when he wanted to travel incognito. It's also noted that he was often depicted as a jaguar leaping into the sun. Most of Ombre Tigre's interpretations are derived from Tepeolat, which begs the question why he's even named Ombre Tigre to begin with. We literally see Tezcatlipoca wearing Ombre Tigre like a second skin in the main quest when Ombre Tigre's shadow attacks in Chapter 9. The fact that Tepeolat was often depicted as leaping into the sun explains Ombre Tigre's obsessive desire to be at Tezcatlipoca's side. His research file is about lucha libre, free-form professional wrestling, relating to the way he tries to be unshackled by everything so he can give his all to his Super Stella. Notably, this unit is using capoeira, a real-life fighting style used by Brazilian slaves that was disguised as a dance. It makes a lot of sense for Ombre Tigre to know capoeira, considering Tezcatlipoca was the patron god of slaves. His unit is 4 stars, fire attribute, blow type, entitled the Beat-Busting Summer Capoeira. Although, I'm like 90% sure it should say Beat-Busting Summer Capoeirista, as in someone who does capoeira. Now let's get into Ombre Tigre's new, or well, old, limited unit, and spoiler alert, it ain't good. His first skill is Fan's Attractor. At phase start, he applies taunt to himself and attracts enemies in a 3x3 area around the second square, you know what, in this range by 1 square at 90%. He also deals nearly double damage to Berserker type enemies because fuck Claude. The second skill is Heart Grasper. When appearing, he gets taunt strengthening, boosting his activation rate by 30% and inflicting charm to hit units and adjacent enemies at 10%. The third is Dilematic Performer. He gains up to 20 CP at 70% when hit and up to 12 CP when attacking at 90%. And at turn start, he gives himself limit at 70%. Ombre Tigre did get a skill evolution at the last second. And I mean last second, in the time it took me to record this line at like 2 AM and wake up at 6 AM. Yes, my sleep schedule is horrible, don't judge me. It adds to his third skill a weird ability that grants deal an extra 1.2, 1.5, 2, and eventually 3 times damage to himself and allies on the entire board. Alongside glint at phase start and limit whether or not he moves at 30%. Keep in mind, the problem with this unit is not a lack of damage, it's an inability to survive, so the skill up isn't too good to begin with. The final skill is Overflowing with Adversity. When hit, he has a 50% chance to apply Guts to himself and removes Drain and Darkness. Okay, so I think the best way to make you understand this unit's flaws is like this. Ombre Tigre has taunt. He wants enemies to hit him. Despite that, he has no defensive buffs, no way to heal himself, his own on-hit skills have a proc that caps out at 40% with all buffs. He does not give enough CP to use his charge skill, and he has lower HP than fucking Tanetomo, who's like 3 feet tall and weighs an ounce. What in the actual fuck is this unit? The only saving grace is that if you really invest in the skill seeds, you can get his guts proc to 100%, but that only lasts as long as he has taunt, which is around 2 turns. I have no team comp recommendations, not even Oz could make this shit work. Great art, awful unit. LifeWonders says Ombre Tigre fans have no rights. Swinging in after that is Festus and his robot Talos. I'll keep it quick because the inspiration for these two is fairly obvious. Hephaestus is based on the Greek god of the forge, who was once kicked out of Olympus but re-welcomed due to his immense talent in blacksmithing. Talos was one of his creations, a gift to King Minos to protect the island of Crete from pirates and stuff. From a distance, he'd throw boulders, but if you ever got close, he'd superheat his core until his bronze outer shell grew red hot and hug you to death. Most of the interpretations for Hephaestus aren't even really interpretations, rather they're just lifted straight from the myths to the transient's backstory. Even that part in Homer's Iliad where he was raised by the Oceanid, your enemy, is part of his backstory in Housamo. And on the other hand, the only similarity Talos has is being made as a mechanical guardian. In the myth, he was like 30 feet tall, and I'm pretty sure the Talos in-game ain't that. We do see him superheat his core in the main quest though. His research file concerns the inner conflict he feels around going to the beach. On one hand, that's where he grew up and where a lot of his good memories lie, and on the other hand, facing memories, be they good or bad, can be difficult. You probably already figured this out, but the kind of dance this unit is doing is a waltz. Not sure how that relates back to Festus, but whatever. Their unit is 5 stars, Aether Attribute, and Sword type, and it's titled the Ideally Depicted Summer Waltz. The first skill is Performer. At phase start, he gets concentration. After moving, he gives Ardor to allies in 1 square at 80% and has increased horizontal movement. The second skill is Oversharer. Before hitting, he attracts enemies in this range by 2 squares. After moving, he applies combo to himself, both at 90%. And at phase start, he gives up to 30 CP to himself and adjacent allies, also at 90%. The third skill is Cybernetic Carver. At phase start, he gets evasion to himself at 90%. After moving on turns by 2, he gets evasion to himself at 80% and deals extra damage to Mechman and Bestow Mechman affected enemies. The final skill is Floor Master. Before hitting, he applies Charm to units and to enemies near them at 40%. After hitting, he has a 90% chance to get crit to himself and a 20% chance to give crit to his allies. As a unit, this one manages to carry enough weight to actually be useful. While most of his stuff caps out at 90%, he does get concentration to boost it by 10%, but that only lasts for 2 turns. That being said, his supportive skills are really good, but they do require that he move. Thankfully, he does have a horizontal movement bonus, which is pretty snazzy. Honestly, he's a unit I'd recommend for those super wide stages since he can traverse them easily while giving buffs. Maybe pair him up with some weaker units like Inaba or Tanatomo, I don't know, I'm just spitballing here, to give their attack a boost. The final limited unit we're covering today is Algernon. This dude's inspired by a book called Flowers for Algernon. The super short summary of a super depressing book is that a man named Charlie gets surgery to make himself smarter, only to realize that everyone has always been treating him poorly. He runs away with a mouse named Algernon who had the same experiment done to it, and through the mouse realizes his intelligence gain is only temporary. The name of the book comes from Charlie's final request, which is for someone to put flowers on Algernon's grave. The fact that Flowers for Algernon is a sci-fi book explains why Algernon is from the sci-fi world of Utopia. Interestingly, both Algernon the Rat and the protagonist of the book, Charlie, are present in the Transient. Algernon is the name of the AI, and Charlie is the name of the cyborg. The thing about Algernon and Charlie losing their intelligence is mimicked in-game, where he explains that his sacred artifact comes at a cost, eventually slowing down his mental faculties. Lastly, Charlie in the book was a janitor, which explains the Transient's obsession with cleaning. His unit is 4 stars, Nether Attribute, and Wand type, and called the Rhythm of the Clean. The first skill is New Era Pioneer. At phase start, he gets attack up and acceleration to himself, but also loses 800 HP. Second, Heavenly Sweeper, after hitting, applies Dazzle at 80 and Charm at 30, while being immune to break. Just like Ombre Tigre, Algernon received a last-minute skill evo. What's new is that when appearing, he pulls and pushes enemies by 1 square towards him and gives himself and allies deal nearly double damage when not debuffed. If stationary, he applies Purification to all adjacent allies and remove debuff to himself at phase start, both at 90%. The third skill is Mechman, giving him a 60% chance to get tenacity to himself before being attacked. The final skill is Floor Stamper. At phase start, removes up to 3000 HP from enemies in this range, up to 2000 HP to enemies in this range, and getting up to 20 CP to himself. As a unit, Algernon is eminently okay. His attack isn't good, but it isn't bad either. Dazzle is mid, and Charm is great, but his proc gets in the way of it actually being useful. And his ability to remove HP is fantastic, but it only happens at phase start. You might be able to get some use out of him, but there's a decent chance you've got better units just lying around. If you're going to build a team around him, you could easily do that with Dazzle. Just pair him with Gyobu, Ziz, Sendayu, Kirito, Amdusias. We aren't exactly lacking for people who get advantage to Dazzle. Because LifeWonders hates me, we have 2 new units this time, even if one's not actually on the banner, so let's get to covering the first of them now, Yamasachi Eco. As the story goes, Yamasachi Eco was a hunter and his older brother Umasachi Eco was a fisher. One day, after much prodding, Uma agrees to trade places, but on the fateful day, Yama loses the fishhook and his brother is not happy about that. Even after melting down his sword into fishhooks, it's still not enough to get Uma's forgiveness, so Yama is sulking on the beach when the god of tides directs him to go to the palace of the sea god Watatsumi. Upon arriving, Watatsumi's daughter falls in love with Yama and the younger brother gets to live happily under the ocean. Eventually, Yama does remember why he came to the palace in the first place and Watatsumi retrieves the lucky hook from the mouth of a red porgy. Before he and his wife leaves, Watatsumi gives him 3 instructions. 1. Return the fishhook in the form of a poem. 2. If your brother plants a rice paddy on highland, plant yours on lowland. 3. And if he attacks you, use these 2 jewels to settle him. Watatsumi's words ring true and the events proceed exactly as planned, with Uma swearing fealty to his younger brother. There's more to the story, including the birth of Yama's child and the falling out with his wife, but it's not too important to the transient. The Yamasachi Eco we see in-game appears to be taken from the halfway point in the story after having lost the fishhook and arriving in the sea god's palace. I can't really go into the interpretations much because he's basically the same character, from the stupid bet to melting down the sword. He's just missing the ocean baddie to call a wife, or maybe he and Otohime have something going on the side, I don't know. His research file relates to his backstory, personality, and sacred artifact. His backstory we already know, but it states that he's also bold and brash, getting excited whenever he sees something shiny only to always be disappointed like the himbo he is. His sacred artifact is his sword that he melted down and turned into thousands of fishhooks, a gift that his brother rejected. Thankfully, the sword pulled a Senbon Zakura because now he can turn the blade into hooks at will and control them from a distance. Getting into his unit, it's 4 stars, wood attribute, and bow type, entitled I Am the Sachi Bounty. The first skill, Sword Alterer, is weapon change to slash at 100 and vigor to himself at 90% after moving. The second skill is Troller. After hitting, he tracks hit units and enemies to their left and right by 2 squares and applies break to hit units at 60%. Yamasachi Eco's last minute skill evo goes as follows. The second skill now also applies tenacity to adjacent allies whether he moves or not at 90%, reduced damage when he has guts when appearing, and concentration to himself at phase start. The third skill is Brilliant Returner. When hit, he applies protection to allies behind and adjacent to himself at 70% and gives up to 6 CP to allies in the same range at 60%. And after moving, he gets up to 500 HP to himself at 80%. Finally is Piled into 1. At phase start, he gets gut to himself at 90%, after moving he gets nourishment at 100 and extra damage against all mountain dweller type enemies. This unit is just like Algernon's, eminently mid. His greatest strength is the combination of guts, nourishment, and healing, meaning he's decently good at just phase tanking damage. Rather than a team comp, I'm gonna recommend you use him on those survive X amount of turn stages, but you could probably do better than Yamasachi Eco anyway. The second new unit to come from this event, and is actually on the banner, is the ever-graceful Otohime. She comes from a Japanese folk story called Urashima Taro. One day, a fisherman saves a sea turtle and as thanks is brought to the sea god's palace where he's thanked by Otohime. He spends 7 days having a good time at the palace, drinking, eating, watching the fish dance, but must return to his sick mother and father. Otohime hands him a tamatabako she tells him to never open and sends him on his way, but when he returns, everything is different. Everyone and everything he knows and loves is long gone because it hasn't been 7 days, it's been over 100 years. Distraught, the fisherman opens the box only to find that his old age was within it, as he quickly grows old and dies. You know, when I started this story, I expected something like Aesop's Fables, not something out of Aesop's fucked up ways to make your children cry. There are some notable similarities between what we see in game and what we see in the story. Yamasachi Eco's backstory and Otohime's appear to be melded into one, with Yamasachi Eco replacing the fisherman. Her sacred artifact is literally the Tamatebako because sometimes LifeWonders does away with subtlety, although in-game it stores bad memories rather than age. The fact that Otohime and the entire event is themed around dancing might be because that in one version of the story, the fisherman is entertained by a variety of dancing fishes. Otohime's research files are fairly basic, only elaborating on stuff we learn in the event story, but they do contain a few extra tidbits. Given her nature as a maintenance AI, she's basically Tokyo's version of Marie Kondo, which explains why she dislikes Talos in his eternally messy room. Secondly, she dislikes Neza given their propensity for slaying dragons, especially since Otohime is, well, kind of a dragon herself. As for her unit, it's 4 stars, water attribute, gun type, entitled the AI Memory Custodian. Their first skill is Vivid Nobility. At phase start, she gets attack up, before hitting has a 90% chance for crit plus to herself, and when hit, changes weapon type to none. The second skill, Emotional Management AI, makes her immune to Rage, Charm, and Fear. The third skill is Mech Man, or well, Mech Woman. Before being attacked, she has a 60% chance for tenacity to herself. The final skill is One Who Puts Years to Rest, a reference to the Tametabako's special ability in the myth. Before hitting, she applies Double Lock to hit units at 50% and Charm to units that hit her also at 50%. Okay, now I see why Otohime and Shinong were the only 2 units not to get skill evos, cause holy hell! Otohime gets attack up and a 90% chance for crit plus, practically guaranteeing anything she hits is one shot. And if they don't die, you can toss a coin on the chance that they'll just get double lock. Out of all the characters, I never expected Otohime to be the one with the fucking shotgun. Your pulls for this banner should be centered around Shinong, and you definitely shouldn't be mad if you get Otohime. She's the second best unit we've got. Algernon is fine, Yamasachi Eco is not actually a part of this banner, and there's not a skill evo in the world strong enough to fix this hot mess. I don't have anything else to say, and this video is already long enough, so let's go ahead and get right into the Patreon shoutouts. For our 3 stars, we have special thanks to 87 Werehog, Deku, Zora Chow, Tron, Garen Lafay, Dragon King Yara, Unknown RC, Lightning Shadow, and Kayun. For 4 stars, we have Miki Moon and Miko, the Revolution Dragons. And for our Super D2per special 5-star shoutouts, we have first, Vanilla Flower, the Draco Overlord. Then, Poor Mage, the Astrograph Sorcerer. Followed by Hodari Lion, the Heavy Metal Foe. Next, Sky King 64, the Mighty Draco Slayer. And finally, Mahagasaur, the Blasting Draco Slayer. Thank you for watching, do be sure to like and subscribe, and as always, this is Joe's Fury signing out.